the affairs of the royal family tells you that we are living in quite bizarre times.
To be simply Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor with no letters after his name, no styles before his name, and to lose those military connections as well will really sting.
Ever-evolving soap opera, that is, of course, what's happening over at Royal Lodge.
King Charles is battling with Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson to convince the Yorks to move out of the Royal Lodge.
Andrew Windsor is spending his last weeks at Royal Lodge ranting to himself.
King Charles is very keen to move Andrew and his ex-wife Fergie on. He doesn't want them to live there anymore.
There is a no-holds-barred, warts-and-all tell-all story waiting to be shared with the world.
72 teddy bears. That's what investigators found arranged on the bed of a grown man who once stood second in line to the British throne. But the teddy bears were just the beginning. Next to them, tucked away in a bedside drawer, was a laminated card with instructions so bizarre, so specific, that even seasoned palace staff couldn't believe what they were reading. What you're about to hear isn't just another royal scandal. These are the untold stories that reveal how one man used his birthright as a weapon of humiliation for over 4 decades. Stories so shocking that witnesses stayed silent for years, terrified of challenging someone they believed untouchable. Until now. The man in question is Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, stripped of his titles, banished from royal duties, and now facing eviction from the mansion he's called home for 2 decades. While the world knows him for his connections to Jeffrey Epstein, there's a darker pattern of behavior that started long before those headlines ever surfaced. At 17 years old, Andrew was already testing boundaries in ways that would make your skin crawl. Picture a house party filled with young aristocrats, everyone settling in for the night. Then at 2 in the morning, bedroom doors start opening. Young women wake to find the teenage prince standing over their beds, claiming he can't sleep because there's a ghost in his room. Could he climb in with them? Just for safety, of course. When they kicked him out, he'd simply move to the next room, trying the same routine. But this wasn't youthful awkwardness. This was the beginning of a pattern that would define his entire life. Fast forward a few years, and the behavior escalated. One journalist recalls interviewing Andrew when he suddenly stormed into a young woman's bedroom, marched straight into her bathroom while she was brushing her teeth, and proceeded to lecture her on proper dental hygiene. Not a knock on the door, not an excuse me, just pure entitlement wrapped in royal privilege. But these invasions of privacy were just warm-ups for what witnesses describe as his signature moves.
The layers of duplicity and shallowness, this is a new low.
What's happened with Andrew losing his title and now her losing Duchess of York, it just proves that the York brand is totally toxic.
This is a prince who had, until all this stuff happened, he was decorated for his military career.
So damaging about this email is that it actually highlights the cynicism in which he's approached this.
He's living in disgrace. He was stripped of his royal duties, and part of that is he's not really being paid by the monarchy anymore because he doesn't complete any royal duty.
Buckingham Palace says that King Charles has started the process to strip Prince Andrew of his title.
I've got to say the King and Queen may be in Rome, but they just can't escape the ongoing scandals surrounding Prince Andrew, can they?
He's entitled to do what he wants, and maybe there's some plausible explanation.
At elegant dinner parties, Andrew developed a repertoire of what he called games that were anything but playful. There was the pate incident. A woman at a formal gathering mentioned that a dish smelled odd. Andrew encouraged her to lean in closer for a better sniff. The moment her face was near the plate, he shoved her head straight into the food. As she sat there, humiliated, covered in pate, while other guests froze in horror, Andrew roared with laughter. To him, her embarrassment was the evening's entertainment. Then came the fire extinguisher wake-up calls. Multiple women reported being startled awake during country house weekends by the sound of childish giggling, only to find Andrew pointing a fire extinguisher at their faces. He'd charge from room to room, treating sleeping guests like targets in his personal amusement park. These weren't pranks between friends. These were calculated power plays by someone who knew his victims couldn't fight back. After all, who complains about the Queen's favorite son? The surprise inspections were perhaps the most unsettling. During overnight gatherings at country estates, Andrew would prowl the corridors after midnight, pushing open any door where he spotted light underneath. One socialite described the horror of hearing her doorknob turn, seeing Andrew's face appear with what she called a predatory grin, announcing he was shopping for entertainment. Another guest revealed that he would sometimes stand outside doors just listening, waiting for the perfect moment to burst in with forced laughter as if he'd caught someone doing something scandalous. Women started sleeping with chairs propped against their doors, terrified of becoming the next target of his midnight rounds. By the 1980s, Andrew had perfected his arsenal of humiliation tactics. The choo-choo train became a dreaded fixture at parties. He'd force guests to form conga lines, making train noises, while he led them through elegant drawing rooms. Refusing to participate meant facing his wrath and public ridicule. The fruit-passing game was even worse. Guests had to hold pieces of fruit between their chin and neck, passing them to each other without using hands. Women described the forced physical closeness as deeply uncomfortable, especially when Andrew would position himself strategically in the line, ensuring maximum awkwardness. But nothing compared to the mustard trick. Andrew would approach unsuspecting guests with a warm smile, telling them to close their eyes, hold out their hands, and make a wish. What they didn't know was that he'd placed an open tube of mustard between their palms. When he told them to clap for their wish to come true, mustard would explode across their faces in formal wear. Witnesses say he'd double over with laughter while his victims stood there, dripping with condiment, unable to do anything but force a smile. Because what else could you do when royalty had just humiliated you for sport? In 1981, the Queen rewarded Andrew's military achievements with a prestigious Egyptian holiday. President Sadat even provided the presidential jet. This was meant to showcase British diplomacy at its finest. Instead, Andrew spent the trip fixating on another guest's wife with such obvious intent that even Egyptian officials noticed the impropriety. The British ambassador, attempting damage control, threw an elegant party featuring Cairo's elite. According to witnesses, Andrew celebrated by jumping fully clothed into the swimming pool, then physically dragging a female hostess in with him. She emerged soaking wet, her evening ruined, while Andrew laughed at his own brilliance. This wasn't teenage rebellion. This was a grown man representing the British crown, turning diplomatic events into his personal playground. The pattern continued everywhere he went. At the grand opening of the Lincolnshire Regiment's museum, Major General Dick Gerard Wright was struggling with his speech papers while wearing formal white gloves. As he carefully removed them, Andrew leapt from his seat, snatched the gloves, and shouted, "You won't need these now, Dick," before flinging them into the crowd. Military officials stood frozen, unsure how to respond when royalty behaved like a classroom clown. The silence that followed wasn't respect, it was pure bewilderment. Perhaps the most infamous incident involved respected broadcaster Tanya Breyer in 1992. At a high society event, surrounded by Britain's most influential people, Andrew allegedly walked up behind her and unzipped her dress. No warning, no consent. Just a powerful man amusing himself by violating a woman's dignity in public. Friends who dined with him at Windsor Castle described conversations that would make sailors blush. One young woman, just 18, was asked about her career. When she replied she was a secretary, Andrew announced to the entire table, "How terribly uninteresting. Is that the best you can find to do?" The crude jokes about women's underwear, the lavatorial humor, the constant need to shock and demean, this wasn't occasional bad behavior. This was who Andrew was at his core. Royal insiders later revealed that Andrew had what they called a strongly juvenile personality. But that's being generous. These weren't the actions of someone who never grew up. These were the calculated moves of someone who understood his power and weaponized it against those who couldn't fight back. For decades, the palace machinery protected him. Complaints were dismissed, witnesses were silenced. And Andrew grew bolder, cruder, more convinced of his untouchability. Each ignored incident reinforced his belief that consequences were for other people. The teddy bears on his bed, all 72 of them, suddenly make sense in this context. Here was a man who never had to grow up because no one ever made him.
They all used to belong to his daughters when they were little, and they've all got, they've all got memories, or maybe he's got attachment issues.
I think the problem is the level of connection that Andrew seems to have to these bears.
It looks very sort of creepy to think of a grown man, not with one teddy, but that kind of fanatical collection of teddy bears.
He says accusations about him have become a distraction from the royal family.
But it's just the attachment and the fact that he's so precise on where he needs them to be.
Does he cuddle them up at night? Does he need them to keep his bed warm?
The laminated card with specific instructions for their arrangement reveals someone who needed to control every detail of his environment, just as he controlled and humiliated those around him. But empires built on intimidation eventually crumble. The Epstein scandal may have been the final straw, but these stories show the foundation was rotten from the start. For every woman pushed into pate, for every midnight invasion, for every cruel joke at someone else's expense, Andrew was building toward his own destruction. On November 6th, King Charles delivered the final blow. Stripped of titles, privileges, and soon his home, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is no longer your Royal Highness. He's simply a man facing the consequences that should have come decades ago. These witnesses stayed silent for years, bound by fear and social pressure. Their stories paint a portrait of privilege corrupted into cruelty, of power wielded without conscience. They reveal not just one man's fall from grace, but an entire system that enabled him for far too long. The palace can no longer pretend these were youthful indiscretions or misunderstood jokes. The pattern is too clear, the witnesses too numerous, the behavior too consistent. Andrew didn't suddenly become problematic. He was always this way. The only difference now is that the world finally knows the truth. What does it say about an institution that protected such behavior for decades? What does it say about a society that forced victims to smile through their humiliation? And what does it say about a man who found joy in others' embarrassment? The teddy bears have been packed away. The laminated instructions no longer matter. The midnight corridors are safe again. But the damage Andrew caused, the dignity he stole, the lives he treated as entertainment, those scars remain. His story serves as a warning. Privilege without accountability breeds monsters. And sometimes those monsters wear crowns. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.